humans. Non-organic entities are simply part of their environment, while animals and plants relate to it from their narrow perspective. They cannot imagine a global natural order, a small part of which they are. You see my point. It's in Lacanian terms, but also I can put it in Hegelian terms, the distinction between what you say, enunciated content, and position of enunciation. Yet it's nice to say, I'm just one of the species, part of nature, blah, blah, blah. But how can you say this? Isn't it that you somehow presume that you are able to stand on your shoulders and have a global, abstract look at reality where you are just one among the species? So horizontal texture of beings is no less anthropocentric than a pyramidal one. This is why it is not enough to repeat that we are part of nature, that we are not its center. So that we should develop new solidarity and accept our modest place in the life on our earth. Let me quote here Judith Butler, with whom I respectfully disagree here. An inhabitable world for humans depends on a flourishing earth that does not have humans at its center. We oppose environmental toxins not only so that we humans can live and breathe without fear of being poisoned, but also because the water and the air must have lives that are not centered on our own. As we dismantle the rigid forms of individuality in these interconnected times, we can imagine the smaller part that human worlds must play on this earth, whose regeneration we depend upon, and which in turn depends upon our smaller and more mindful role. End of quote. I think that it is all too simple to insist that the water and the air must have lives that are not centered on our own. Is it not that? But I think effectively the opposite is true. Global warming and other ecological threats demand our collective interventions into environment, which will be incredibly powerful, direct interventions into the fragile balance of forms of life. When we say that the rise of average temperature has to be kept below, and this magic number always oscillates, it's 1.5 Celsius, it's 2 Celsius degrees, we talk and try to act as general managers of life on Earth, not as a modest species. The regeneration of the Earth obviously does not depend upon our smaller and more mindful role. It depends upon our gigantic role, which is the truth beneath all the talk about our finitude and mortality. What we get here is the extreme form of the gap at work already in modern science and subjectivity. Modern science aims at mastering nature, but it is strictly codependent with the vision of humanity as just another species on the earth. This is the paradox we have to sustain in these crazy days. To accept that we are one among the species on earth and simultaneously to think and act as universal beings. Don't even ecologists admit this. When they say we have to keep the balance of our environment, again, they speak from a universal position. They speak in an, if you want, extremely arrogant mode. And this gap between what we talk about and the subjective position involved in our saying and acting is, I think, crucial. I'm usually very critical of, small detour, of Hannah Arendt. But in her short text on education, she says something wonderful, which I think is also the proper answer to all those who neurobiologists and so on, who claim, sorry, it can be proven, it can't be, it's more complex, but it can be proven that all our acts are biologically, neurally, and so on, determined. But you know what's the problem here? As a Hegelian, with whom I'm often in polemics, but he is not a total idiot. No, I'm not patronizing him. There are only two types of people, total idiots and not total idiots. God is maybe, but there is no God up there. Not an idiot. Okay, what Pippin says is that we should ask the question, what to do in a concrete situation when you have to act. Can you say, why should, let's say, it's a pathetic case, but sorry. You see, oh my God, so pathetic. A small, nice girl, a child drowning in a swimming pool or whatever. Now, I don't think you will say, what the hell, why should I worry? I'm predetermined. My neuronal nature will speak, and so on. You should act as if you are free. And here things get complex because you still, if you are a radical neurobiologist, you can say, yes, this is called user's illusion. But again, it gets more complex, and here I come to Hannah Arendt. This is what explains another paradox. That's why in theological matters I absolutely prefer Protestantism. Did you notice this basic paradox of Protestantism? I simplify things very much, but on the one hand, Protestantism preaches predetermination. Everything is predetermined by God. If we are saved or lost, it's predetermined before even the creation of the world. But the trick is that you don't know how you are predetermined. That's why Protestant predestination doesn't allow you to just sit down, watch hardcore pornography, whatever, and say, I don't care, everything is No, you are, and this is, I think that this is the closest we can come to true freedom. True freedom is not, oh, I'm in a strawberry, again, my old example, I'm in a patisserie, oh, I'm now free to decide strawberry cake or cheesecake. No. True freedom is, I know I'm predetermined, but I don't know how. So I worry, what if by mistake I miss what I am predetermined to do? This crazy situation where what if I miss the necessity? And yes, back to Hannah Arendt, it's such a simple but deeply true observation. She writes in that short text on the education that our common situation as parents, where today, who knows what will happen? War, hunger, chaos, and if a small kid, son, he, she, or it, I'm correct, I would like to be it, not they, as they are now, trans, you know, because in my language it's extremely ridiculous. They is still used in Slovene, but as this extremely flattering case, like if you are with a mega authority, you ask him, what would they like? Me. And it's simply, but okay, what I want to say is that, let's say a child asks you, Father, what's happening? What's going on? I'm confused. I don't know. How will I survive? And wouldn't the only honest answer be to say, what do I know? What the hell? I'm also in a total mess. Sorry, guy, you are on your own. Do it. It's totally true. But at the level of your subjectivity, it's a fake. So isn't this a beautiful paradox where, although it's true that you as a parent don't have this all-encompassing knowledge, you have heroically assumed it. Although you know it's a lie, and now I don't have time to go into it, this is not the same as the cynical approach advocated by some Lacanians, unfortunately, today, which is pretend that authority is authentic and so on, because otherwise there will be chaos. No, it's something, it's that you have to lie in the sense of acting with authority that you don't have, but you have to lie as the only ethical way left to you. So let's go on. The temptation to be resisted here is to continue to rely on our basic notion of nature and proclaim chaos as somehow unnatural. You see, this is the true anthropocentrism for me. When you look at chaotic nature, trees burning, blah, 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 and say this is not natural. No, sorry. Nature is unnatural. Everything is unnatural. What do I mean by this? Please, if you want to read a really good science fiction novel, read Liu Cixin's contemporary Chinese author. He is in trouble now, of course, politically. Maybe you read it. The three-body problem, about a planet far away from Earth called Tri Solaris, which has three suns, which rise and set at strange, unpredictable intervals. So that the devastating hurricanes, droughts, floods, and so on, that's the state of things there. And I think maybe this is what we are approaching. We are thus, I claim, entering a new phase in which it is simply nature itself which melts into thin air. The main consequence also of the scientific breakthroughs in biogenetics is the end of nature. Once you know the rules of the construction of natural objects, natural organisms are transformed into objects amenable to manipulation. And I think we should accept this. This is why now I come to the lowest of my guilty pleasures. It wanted to be a big hit, but it failed. But I somehow enjoy it. You probably, if you've seen it, hate it. Did you see Roland Emmerich's last movie, Moonfall? It's horror. But you know what I like about it? The premise of the movie is that our moon is an artificial megastructure constructed by the ancestors of humanity. The plot of the movie is that moon is approaching Earth, and we send very easily, a couple of hundred of miles, astronauts there. They discover a hole on the moon, they enter it, and it's a beautiful description of how on the outside moon is chaotic, rugged terrain. The more you go in, the more you see machinery and so on and so on. I think that this is what is happening. That what people claim the end of humanity, the post-human era, where we will be able, through biogenetic and other technologies, to manipulate our mind, will also mean the end of nature. Nature, human and inhuman, is deprived of its impenetrable density. This compels us to give a new twist to Freud's title, Unbehagen in der Kultur, discontent, uneasiness in culture. With the latest developments, scientific developments, the discontent shifts from culture to nature itself. Nature is no longer natural, the reliable, dense background of our lives. It appears as a fragile mechanism which, at any point, can explode into a catastrophic dimension. This is why, again, while there are 3, 4, 5 modes of what I call false ideological ecology, for example, it's easy to enumerate them. The first one is simple ignorance. Ecological troubles are a marginal phenomenon, life goes on, nature will take care of itself. Then the next deviation, science and technology can save us. Just trust science. The next one, leave the solution to the market, higher taxation of the polluters and so on. Then the already mentioned superego pressure, you are personally responsible, and so on. And sorry, just friendly gesture. And then 5, the worst of them all, the advocating of a return to natural balance, to become respectful children of our mother nature. But I think that this is such a dangerous mythology, this, you know, that this is the most dangerous anthropocentrism. This idea, nature in itself follows some kind of a homeostatic balance, natural patterns, and then we humans with our hubris derail the natural rhythm. But just think about the fact that our main sources of energy, still today, oil, coal, are remnants of past catastrophes which occurred prior to the advent of humanity. And we are the outcome of these catastrophes. Every good historian of our Earth will tell you that without that mega catastrophe, you know, which destroyed all dinosaurs and so on, there would have been no humans on our Earth. So, you know, like, yes, there is Mother Nature, but it's a cold and cruel bitch, to cut a long story short. But this in no way entails that we should relax and trust our future. So, what is to be done? We are in deep mess. I just want to present you with problems. There is no simple democratic solution here. The idea that people themselves, not just governments and corporations, should decide what to do sounds deep, but it begs an important question. Even if the comprehension of scientists is not distorted by corporate interests, what qualifies them to pass a judgment in such a delicate matter? And we ordinary people have to rely on scientists. Plus, the radical measures advocated by some ecologists can themselves trigger new catastrophes. Let me take the idea of solar radiation management. The continuous massive dispersals of aerosols into our atmosphere to reflect and absorb sunlight and thus cool our planet. However, this SRM is extremely risky. It could decrease crop yields, irreparably alter the water cycle, and so on and so on. We cannot even imagine how the fragile balance of our Earth functions. This continuously confronts us with the deadlock of the contemporary society of choice. In the standard situation of the first choice, I'm free to choose on condition that I make the right choice, so that the only thing left to me is to do the empty gesture, pretending to accomplish freely what is in any case imposed on me. And this mechanism is not necessarily totalitarian. I think that our entire social identity is constructed in this way. There is a free choice, but you are given the freedom to choose if you make the right choice. And I will repeat now, sorry if some of you know it, one of my favorite old stories, it happened to a friend of mine when he was serving 40 years ago in the Yugoslav army. That after 2 weeks of introductory training, you had the big moment. All the soldiers were gathered in a big field, you repeated the oath, and then each of us has to sign his agreement, like I'm ready to sacrifice my life to defend my country, blah, blah. And the friend of mine did something breathtaking. He confronted the officer and says, am I obliged to sign this, or do I have a free choice? And the officer told him, of course you have a free choice, because otherwise it wouldn't oblige you. And my friend said, okay, then I refuse to choose. And the officer started to shout at him, would like to be arrested, blah, blah. And after 5-10 minutes of conflict, the officer, who was rather a stupid guy, I think, proposed this solution, and my friend still has this paper. It's on his wall as his most precious document. The officer wrote to him a piece of paper ordering him to freely sign the oath. This is not some totalitarian joke. That's how, at a basic level, our social identity functions. But today, the choice really is free. And it's, for this very reason, experienced as even more frustrating. We find ourselves constantly in the position of having to decide about matters that will fundamentally affect our lives, but without a proper foundation in knowledge. To quote my severe critic, who really hates me, John Gray, but here I agree with him, we have been thrown into a time in which everything is provisional. New technologies alter our lives daily. The traditions of the past cannot be retrieved. At the same time, we have little idea of what the future will bring. We are forced to live as if we were free. End of quote. Maybe this is why it is so difficult to act today. Adrian Johnson, one of our fellow travelers, Lacanian fellow travelers, characterized very nicely today's geopolitical situation as, quote, a situation in which the world's societies and humanity as a whole are facing multiple acute crises. Global pandemic, environmental disasters, massive inequality, ballooning poverty, potentially devastating wars, and so on. Yet, we seem unable to take the admittedly radical or revolutionary measures necessary to resolve this crisis. We know things are broken. We know what needs fixing it. We even sometimes have ideas about how to fix them. But nevertheless, we keep doing nothing, either to mend the damage already done or to prevent further easily foreseeable damage. End of quote. What does this mean? The situation today is not that. That's the paradox I wanted to impair of you. It's not that of, ideological mystification, like, they're telling us, no, it's not really ecological crisis. No, we are bombarded all the time by, all those metaphors. It's 5 minutes to noon, we should act, and so on. But somehow nothing happens. We cannot act. So the usual idea that the truth is in our acts, not in our lives, has to be turned around. Another of my guilty pleasures, I sometimes watch, it's over now, that TV series about that crazy doctor, House. In one episode, somebody says, even your actions lie. And that's the paradox today. Look at one of the most disgusting events, I think recently, it was when? A year and a half, 2 years ago already, that Glasgow conference about global warming. In some sense, all the right things were said there. We have to act now, blah, 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 blah. But we say it and things go on. And that's, again, today's cynicism. Why are we passive? Where does this passivity come from? Today's global capitalism generates apathy precisely because it demands from us permanent hyperactivity, constant engagement in its devastating dynamic. I want to give you here another example, very problematic politically for some of you, where also we can see how crucial it is, not only with regard to our sexual mess, but with regard to the political situation, how important this Freudian split is. I don't know if you followed it closely, but when on the 23rd of February, Russia attacked Ukraine, I was shocked by the reaction of my friends which was a kind of a relief. Okay, now it will be quickly over. It's absolutely clear, if you read retroactively the documents, that our secret hope, desire, was that, okay, it will be over in 2-3 days, Russian commandos will take over Kiev, it's over, then we will complain a little bit, but life will go on and so on and so on. The real unexpected trauma is that Ukrainians resisted, you know. That was the big, we really don't like it, and no matter how much we try to help them now and so on and so on. But let me go on. The aftermath of the constant capitalist innovation is the permanent production of the piles of leftover waste. The obverse of the incessant capitalist drive to produce new and new objects are growing piles of useless waste, piled mountains of used cars, computers, and so on. Like, it's a wonderful place to visit, you should. The famous old plains resting place in the Mojave Desert. In these ever-growing piles of inert, dysfunctional stuff, which cannot but strike us with their useless inert presence, one can, as it were, perceive the capitalist drive at rest. Objects, that's why, if you want to ask me what to do, not at the level of actual change, but at the level of at least acquiring the distance from this crazy capitalist dynamic, I remember, I don't know if the fashion is still going on, but some 20, 30 years ago, when I visited Japan, the fashion was in full swing. The fashion of, maybe you met some of them, or read, the so-called, I'm sorry if I mispronounce it, shindogu, which means there was a whole fashion of producing objects which function, but function in such a crazy, useless way that you cannot commercialize them. It's meaningless. For example, there were glasses with, how do you call this, against rain? Windshield wipers, so that you can, or there are inverted umbrellas, so that when it rains, water is collected in a bottle and you can always drink fresh water. I find something so refreshing in this. Instead of being against technology, as it were, undermining it from within, you know, it's wonderful, it works, but it's, in some sense, it's meaningless. That's why I still like Andrei Tarkovsky's films, exemplary his masterpiece Stalker, which takes place in a post-industrial wasteland with wild vegetation growing over abandoned factories, concrete tunnels and railroads full of stale water and wild overgrowth in which stray cats and dogs wander. Nature and industrial civilization are here again overlapping, but through a common decay. Civilization in decay is in the process of again being reclaimed by nature. That's why this is what I like about Tarkovsky's films. There is a lot of experience of a divine, sacred there, but it's not our usual Christian experience. It's not our filthy earth and then you look up. No, if you saw some Tarkovsky films, copy them. You get them even on YouTube for free, like Stalker. His experience of the sacred is you are down on earth, you put your head in muddy water, as if the sacred is in the filth of this earth. Here I would like to, since some of you I know like Walter Benjamin, a wonderful notion of Benjamin's. He defined natural history as renaturalized history. It takes place when historical artifacts lose their meaningful vitality and are perceived as dead objects reclaimed by nature. And I think that to be a real ecologist today, this is the first step. to get rid of any notion of pure, pristine, real nature, to accept this weird, like living dead, nature which is not some real natural nature, but which is our civilization in its ruins being recaptured by nature. Here, I want to define this as something that already in the early years of the Soviet Union, that utopian moment, but this was, I cannot resist making a political remark. You know, in this utopian moment, Ukraine, as we know it today, was born. Did you notice something? Sorry, I cannot escape it. If you check it up, the two Putin's crucial speeches, 21st and 23rd of February, when he announced attack on Ukraine, did you notice that he critically mentions only one name? You know which name? Lenin. He said Ukraine was Lenin's invention. He even says that the proper name of Ukraine should be Ukraine named by, in Russian, Ukraine imeni Vladimir, named Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. And that's why, in a nice brutal irony, when they were taking down monuments to Lenin in Ukraine, he says, you want decommunization. Wait, when we will be there, you will get a real decommunization. The point being, Lenin invented Ukraine. It's of course much more complex, but what I'm saying here is that that at that utopian moment, which ended up in failure, of course, but it's very interesting, Ukraine in the 1920s was maybe closer than other parts of the Soviet Union, a place for, it was destined to fail, but a place of some kind of socialist utopia. Like, I would like to be at that point, you know that in a small Ukrainian town, I forgot which one, at some art academy, they were teaching in the same building the two opposite modernists, Chagall and Malevich. They hated each other, but that was the situation. Everything was bursting. Ukrainian language, which was also prohibited in the Tsarist times, became a proper language with dictionaries, grammar books being written, and so on and so on. Then with Stalin, it all changed. So what I'm saying is that in that utopian time, we got this wonderful expression, objects as comrades, to learn to treat natural objects as comrades. Now let me be very careful here. This doesn't mean the bullshit of, I communicate, this kind of fake neo-spiritualism. There is a spiritual dimension in nature, I communicate with, no, this is the stuff of King Charles, ex-Prince Charles, one of the great idiots who boasted in an interview 20 years ago, asked, what do you do in the evening? Where? I like to go to a garden and have a conversation with trees. No, thanks, you know. But it means accept our environment in all its complex mixture that includes what we perceive as trash or pollution, as well as what we cannot directly perceive since it is too large or too minuscule, Tim Morton's hyper-objects. Along this line, for Tim Morton, I disagree with him philosophically, but here he has some very interesting notions. Being ecological, for Morton, a quote, is not about spending time in a pristine nature preserve, but about appreciating the wheat working its way through a crack in the concrete. It's also part of the world and part of us. Reality is populated with strange strangers. This strange strangeness is an irreducible part of every rock, tree, plastic statue of liberty, quasar, black holes, and so on and so on. So that's his idea nature is not pristine. Nature is precisely this mixture of all forms of decay and so on and so on. Before I pass to the final part, I want just to give you two wonderful examples of how such mixture can function. Do you remember, you are close to Manhattan? I didn't experience it, but I read in the newspaper the fate of rats in Manhattan during the pandemic. Manhattan is a living system of humans, cockroaches, and millions of rats. Lockdown at the peak of the pandemic meant that since all restaurants were closed, rats who lived off the trash from restaurants were deprived of the source of their food. This caused mass starvation. Many rats were found eating their offspring and so on and so on. And then the horror is some of my friends experienced this. When they opened the first restaurants only out, not inside, on the street, customers reported that all the time rats were running between their legs because they were starved. They were desperately searching for food. This would be a nice view, you know. Why only pandemic for humans? What did it mean for rats? I can imagine an evil science fiction story in the style of Patricia Highsmith, read her, The Greatest, of telling the pandemic experience from the standpoint of rats, you know. The horror and my leftist rat dream. The rats tried to organize some war communism, you know, end of individualism for rats. Another example, which is even more tragic. You know that in 1958, at the beginning of the Great Leap Forward, the Chinese government declared that, this is official formulation, birds are public animals of capitalism because they are destroying harvest on fields and so on and so on. So there was a big public campaign to eliminate sparrows. Their nests were destroyed, eggs were broken, chicks were killed. Millions of people organized in groups and hit noisy pots and pans to prevent sparrows from resting in their nests. So when they got tired, they dropped down and they were collecting. It sounds nice. And it was a totally successful campaign. There was just a problem. When the campaign was over, they all of a sudden discovered what positive function rats also played. Sparrows. They ate in the fields large number of insects and so on, so that rice yields after the campaign were substantially decreased. It was hunger, one of the conditions of the big hunger in that point. So that this is wonderful absurdity. In 1960, Chinese government had to buy from Soviet Union 1 million sparrows to repopulate them. So what's the problem with ecological awareness? Don't be afraid, I am approaching the conclusion. I want to quote a passage from George Orwell he wrote it in 1937, where he deployed the ambiguity of the predominant leftist attitude towards class difference. He claims that all progressive guys want poverty to disappear, classes to disappear, but they don't mean it. It's very perceptible observation. It holds for many so-called postmodern theorists today, I claim. You do all the critical analysis and so on, but basically you do this just to make it sure the things will not really change, you know. It's like me, I'm saying this from my personal experience. If there ever was an obsessional neurotic, it's me. And I'm doing this, that a lot of academia functions like this today. You talk, we are in deep crisis, panic, and so on, but you talk just to make it sure that nothing will really change. How did I experience this? When I was, just for a couple of months, I couldn't stand it, in psychoanalysis, I talked all the time, the 10 minutes short Lacanian session that I was allotted. All the time. Why? Then I looked deep into my heart. Because I was afraid that if I stop talking for a second, the analyst may ask me a really tough question. So you see the paradox. I was talking all the time to making it sure that nothing will change. And I think that this is how we are dealing today basically with ecology. So I will read a quote from Orwell. I will just replace poverty or class with global warming. Look now the quote. We all rail against global warming, but very few people seriously want to abolish it. So long as it is merely a question of ameliorating the lot of ordinary people, every decent person is agreed. But unfortunately, you get no further by merely wishing global warming away. Exactly, it is necessary to wish it away, but your wish has no efficacy unless you grasp what it involves. The fact that has got to be faced is that to abolish global warming means abolishing a part of yourself. Each of us will have to alter him, herself so completely that at the end, he, she, it will hardly be recognizable as the same person. And I take this very seriously, this statement. Namely, I had a certain, although I'm fascist, totalitarian privately, I lack state order, total control. I was for obligatory, vaccination. But I had a certain sympathy for those who opposed it, some American populist right-wingers, Agamben, because I think they got it. No, Agamben is not this, although strangely, you know, it's so incredible how often today the apparent opponents speak the same language. I'm now finishing a new text of how we all make fun of Russia, but how Russian official Orthodox, Putin, Dugin, and those guys' ideology echoes the most fanatical American new Christian populism. Like, are you following what is going now in Russia? Now, officially, it's not one nut guy saying it. Officially, the goal is no longer denazification of Ukraine, but de-satanization. Patriarch Kirill, the boss of Orthodox Church, gave an official claim a week ago, title to Putin, Chief Exorcist. And people are now talking of desatanization and so on, that Ukraine is no longer a normal state, but a kind of satanic cult regime, and that Western Europe is also becoming it, and so on and so on. I sympathize with those people who said, but this type of control, you cannot meet your fellows and so on. It definitely really affects, imposes us to renounce some features, how you socialize and so on, which we did spontaneously perceive as part of being human. This was real. So I think that's the difficult task ahead. We need more globalization, not less. We need global solidarity and cooperation more than ever. You remember, friends were sending me shots. It was horrible. You remember last summer, a year and a half ago in June, you remember there was a so-called heat dome in northwest of the United States, southwest of Canada, Seattle, Vancouver. Temperatures almost 50 degrees Celsius, which means at that point, that part of United States, Canada was warmer than Saudi Arabia, the Middle East, and so on. But here I disagree with those who don't trust state authority and claim, no, ecology movement, it shouldn't be left to the state, it should be done from below, people fight locally and then only if necessary. No, sorry. If you look at, measure them by ecological criteria, those parts, northwest of the United States, southwest of Canada, were not doing bad. They were at the level of ecological measures pretty well. The problem is that this dome, heat dome, was the result of a global perturbation of how the air circulates in northern spheres of Arctic spheres of our planet. So this means that heat dome was a local phenomenon, but it is the result of global disturbances. So we cannot, it's meaningless to do it on the local level. The approach has to be global. Next point, and this is the really scary point. Science and technology today no longer aim only at understanding and reproducing natural processes. At the same time, we try to generate new forms of life that will surprise us. The goal is no longer just to dominate nature the way it is, but to generate something new, greater, stronger than ordinary nature, including ourselves. The dream that sustains the scientific technological endeavor is to trigger a process with no return, a process that would exponentially reproduce itself and go